time passes faster at your head than your feet. You probably never thought of yourself as taller than time, but you are. Not metaphorically, not spiritually, but physically and measurably. Right now, where you sit or stand, the very top of your head is aging faster than your feet, not in a mystical sense or in some poetic abstraction, but in the cold, stubborn math of Einstein's theory of general relativity. This isn't a philosophical musing, it's a scientific fact, one that has been tested, confirmed, and quantified. And yet, it feels so absurd, so detached from ordinary life, that you might be tempted to ignore it, to file it away as an odd curiosity. But pause for a moment. Let the strangeness sink in. The atoms in your scalp are living through time ever so slightly faster than the atoms in your toes. The seconds tick just a little quicker at the top than they do at the bottom. This time difference is infinitesimal. Yes, but it's real, and it reveals something astonishing, that time is not absolute. That even on the scale of your body, time bends, it stretches, it curves with gravity. You don't notice because you're always in both places at once. But time is whispering a different story to every inch of you, and suddenly, you realize you are not moving through time like a train along a track. You are living within a field, a warping landscape, where gravity reshapes not just your bones, but your very duration, and the more you think about it, the more surreal it becomes. Because this isn't limited to your height. The very concept of now depends on where you are, and how deep in a gravity well you stand. Einstein's general theory of relativity tells us that massive objects warp the space-time around them, like a bowling ball on a trampoline. But what's harder to grasp is that this warping doesn't just affect the path of planets or light. It affects time itself. Gravity slows it down. The closer you are to a massive object, the more time drags its feet. The higher up you go, away from that mass, the freer time becomes. And because Earth is a sphere with mass, that means there is slightly more gravity at your feet than at your head, slightly more warping, slightly more time dilation, and so your feet lag behind your head ever so imperceptibly, like two clocks set to nearly the same time, but never quite matching. And it's not just a theory, we've tested it. We've taken atomic clocks, the most precise instruments ever built, and placed them at different altitudes. We've flown them on airplanes, launched them on rockets, placed them on mountain peaks and city streets. And each time we find the same result. The higher the clock, the faster it ticks. A twin living at sea level will, over time, age slightly more slowly than one who lives on a mountain. It's a truth that shatters our everyday assumptions. We tend to think of time as impartial, as a uniform background rhythm that all things obey. But the universe says otherwise. Time is personal. Time is local. Time is warped by the very space you inhabit. And yet, because the difference is so small, nanoseconds over a lifetime, we ignore it. We live as though time is flat, predictable, and unchanging. But what if you stopped ignoring it? What if you leaned into the realization that time, even within your own body, is a negotiation between height and gravity? That every breath you take, every heartbeat, every thought, is happening in a field where time's current varies by inches. It changes how you see yourself. It changes how you understand aging, memory, experience. Because if your body is aging at slightly different rates simultaneously, what does that mean for identity? For continuity? For the story you tell yourself about being a single, unified self, moving through a stable river of moments? You are not just a passenger in time. You are a collection of slightly asynchronous processes, a layered being, aged by altitude. You are not just growing older. You are stretching through space-time in a subtle arc. And while these differences may be small, they matter, because they reveal a deeper truth. Time is not something you move through. Time is something that moves with you, around you, beneath you, above you. Always relative, always curved by mass and motion. Consider the implications. On Earth, but near a massive object, like a black hole, the warping becomes extreme. Time slows to a crawl. minutes stretch into centuries. From the outside, you appear frozen. From the inside, reality contracts into a suffocating now. And if time can bend that far, if it can fracture and diverge depending on your location, then what is time, really? Not a universal clock, but a variable fabric, stitched to the structure of the cosmos, and intimately tied to your position within it. Your life is not measured against a single, shared tempo. It's mapped along a shifting surface, and in that realization, you find something humbling. Even the simplest act, standing upright, places you in two slightly different time zones. Your head lives in the future compared to your feet. Your brain sends commands downward to a body living just a touch behind. You are a walking contradiction, a vertical spectrum of now, and that discrepancy scales upward. In the GPS satellites orbiting Earth, time ticks faster than it does on the ground. Not by choice, but by necessity. If engineers didn't account for time dilation, for the effects of altitude and speed on time's passage, your phone's location would drift by kilometers every day. The satellites would become useless. Navigation would fail. So we correct for relativity every second. The satellite's onboard clocks are programmed to run slightly slower, just to match what we observe on Earth. Our entire civilization depends on accepting that time is not absolute, that it must be calibrated for context. It's no longer just a theory, it's infrastructure. Relativity runs your map apps. It aligns your data, it synchronizes your networks. And yet, you walk through the world as though time is a given, unaware that every device you use is secretly correcting for the strange, silent curvature of reality. Now pull back from the machines and return to your body. Imagine lying down. In that position, your head and feet align horizontally. The gravitational difference lessens. Time becomes more equal across your form. And perhaps that's part of why rest feels timeless. Not just because you stop moving, but because you flatten your experience across the field. You become more unified in time. It's as though the posture of your body plays with the flow of time like an instrument. Each stance, each motion, reorients your position in a field that never stops distorting the very minutes of your life. And once you internalize this, once you see yourself as suspended in a warp, you begin to ask other questions. If time is this sensitive, how else might it be shaped? What about your speed, your emotions, your memories? If gravity can slow time, can trauma do the same? Can joy make it fly? The answer, in some ways, is yes. Because psychological time, the way you feel moments, is not separate from physical time. Your brain runs on chemistry and electricity, both of which are rooted in physical laws. And so, time bends not only with mass and motion, but with meaning. And here, science begins to curve back toward philosophy. You realize that time is not just a number on a watch or a unit in an equation. It is the medium through which you become. It shapes how you age, how you remember, how you hope. You carry time in your cells, in your muscles, in your memories, and the revelation that even within your body, time flows unevenly, reminds you that experience itself is uneven, that each part of you might remember differently, age differently, respond differently. You are a time traveler with every breath, not because you leap through centuries, but because you tilt subtly through a field that refuses to be flat. You are always becoming, always arriving slightly out of sync with yourself. And that is not a flaw. It is the signature of your place in a living, bending universe. You are not above the rules. You are the rule in motion, the experiment happening in real time. A living gradient of the now. So the next time you stand beneath the sky and wonder about the future, remember, part of you is already closer to it. The top of your head, ever so slightly, is stepping ahead of your feet, and that is enough to reframe your existence. You are not just passing through time, time is flowing through you, faster and slower, depending on how high you stand. And maybe that's what makes life so vivid. Not that time is constant, but that it moves like breath, sometimes shallow, sometimes deep, depending on how and where you hold yourself in the world. You are more than a body in time. You are a shape in space-time, a ripple in a fabric that curves quietly beneath your awareness. And in that awareness, you can begin to live not just in time, but with time, beside it, in rhythm, with its strange and beautiful war. Time slows, near massive objects. You probably don't feel it when you walk toward a mountain, but time bends there, slows, ever so slightly, not in any way you feel, but altering the universe's rhythm, a silent stretching of seconds, caused not by speed or motion, but by mass. The sheer weight of existence pulling on the fabric of time itself. And this idea, while at first abstract or poetic, is a measurable reality in physics, one born from Einstein's general relativity, which tells us something quietly astonishing, that time is not an untouchable, background constant flowing independently of matter, but a field that can be warped, distorted, slowed down by the presence of mass and gravity. So near any massive object, time itself ticks more slowly compared to regions of weaker gravitational pull. And although in everyday life these differences are too small for your body to notice, they grow more meaningful with stronger gravity, turning time into something variable, stretchable, something no longer absolute but dependent on where you stand in the architecture of space. And suddenly, the very idea of a universal now begins to unravel, replaced by a landscape where clocks disagree, not because they malfunction, but because they are faithfully following the curvature of space-time around them. Imagine standing near the surface of Earth, at sea level, while someone else floats far above you in space. Perhaps an astronaut in orbit or a satellite drifting silently across the curvature of the planet. And although you may feel like you are both sharing the same moment, the same minute, the same cosmic tick of the clock, relativity says otherwise. Time is moving slower for you on the ground, pulled gently backward by the Earth's gravity, while the person above you is slipping through time just a little faster, aging more quickly by microseconds that accumulate over years. And while this seems inconsequential, it matters immensely for the technologies we rely on. Global positioning systems, for instance, which must correct for both the speed of the satellites, which also affects time due to special relativity, and their altitude, which affects it through gravitational time dilation. Otherwise, your phone's map would send you miles off course within a single day, and it's not just theory. These differences have been measured with atomic clocks, which are so precise they can detect the change in time between the floor and a tabletop, proving once and for all that gravity does not merely bend space. It bends time itself, and that your position in a gravitational field subtly determines how quickly or slowly you move through your life. As if the weight of nearby mass were dragging on the seconds, stretching them into longer, quieter beats of existence. No, carry this idea further, not to satellites or skyscrapers, but to truly massive objects, cosmic monsters like neutron stars and black holes, whose gravitational pull is so intense that the time dilation becomes extreme, visible, undeniable near the surface of a neutron star. For example, 1 second might stretch into hours compared to time on Earth, and near the event horizon of a black hole, that invisible boundary beyond which nothing, not even light, can escape. Time slows down so drastically that it approaches a standstill, meaning that to a distant observer, anything falling into a black hole would appear to freeze in place, never quite crossing the threshold, stuck forever in slow motion. While for the falling object itself, time continues normally until the moment it vanishes from view, leaving only the memory of its frozen image behind. And in this scenario, you begin to realize something deeper, that time is not a singular experience, not a universal drumbeat echoing across the stars, but a local phenomenon, deeply personal, sculpted by your proximity to mass and energy, and that the passage of time is not the same for everyone. Everywhere, it's different in a valley than on a peak, on Earth than in space, near a black hole than in empty void. And this leads to a disorienting but liberating truth, that time is not something the universe gives you, but something it allows based on where you are. This insight rewrites your understanding of time not as a backdrop, but as a participant in the universe. Dynamic, malleable, even fragile. And it challenges the deep human instinct to view time as fair. Even objective, it reveals a cosmos where fairness has no place, where someone's second is another person's eternity, where mass and gravity do not just pull on your body but on your moments, your aging, your experience of change itself. And once you understand this, you begin to see how connected matter and time truly are, how every atom contributes not just to space but to the pace of life. And this opens a door to something haunting, the realization that your lifespan is not fixed in an absolute sense, that aging itself is relative, not merely to genetics or biology, but to location, to motion, to gravity, to context, meaning that in another place, under different conditions, you would be younger or older than you are now. Not metaphorically, but physically. Think now of the famous thought experiment, the twin paradox, where one twin remains on Earth, while the other travels at high speed, through space, or hovers near a black hole's event horizon. And upon reuniting, they find that time has passed differently for each of them. The traveling twin, having aged less, having lived fewer moments, because their path through space-time curved more steeply, dragged harder against the pull of gravity. And though this seems to break everything you thought you knew about time and fairness and identity, it's a truth baked into the very laws of the universe. And more than that, it's a signpost pointing to something even stranger, that the universe does not offer a single shared timeline for all things, but a mosaic of personal timelines, stitched from each object's gravitational experience. And in this view, the cosmos becomes a quilt of shifting clocks, all ticking at their own rates. And you, right now, are a thread in that quilt. Your moments determined not by some divine clock in the sky, but by your proximity to mass. And in that perspective, even standing on Earth becomes more mysterious. The core of the Earth, closer to the planet's gravitational center, experiences time more slowly than the surface, which means that the atoms deep inside the planet are aging more slowly than the sand you step on, or the air you breathe. And while that difference is slight, it is real, and it means the Earth itself is a time gradient, a slow unfolding of layers, aging at different rates, a planetary hourglass that flows unevenly. And if time can bend so easily here, what else might it be doing across the cosmos? In the warped pockets of dark matter, or the invisible threads that shape everything we know. And suddenly you realize that the story of time is also the story of matter, of place, of presence, and that your body, your thoughts, your emotions are all shaped by a clock you cannot see, one that pulses with the weight of everything around you. So where does this leave you? Not disoriented, but awakened. Awakened to a reality where time is not a ruler, but a ripple. Not a straight path, but a terrain, shaped by the gravity wells you pass through, by the masses you orbit, by the invisible pulls that surround you. And in this way, your life is not just a journey through time, but a dance with gravity, a dialogue with mass, a quiet unfolding through a world that is bending the tempo of your existence without ever asking your permission. And perhaps that's what makes it so humbling, the knowledge that you are not sovereign over time, that it shifts silently depending on where you are in the universe. And once you feel that, once you see yourself not as moving through a fixed timeline, but as existing along a personal curve of time molded by space-time itself, you begin to live differently, not rushing to catch time or fearing its speed, but learning to feel its texture, its thickness, its slow dance near the massive and its lightness in the void. And with that awareness, time softens, not as a thing to conquer, but as something to notice. So the next time you look up at the sky, or feel the weight of a mountain beneath you, or wonder how long something takes, remember, time is not a river outside of you. It is a field you are inside, and it curves and shifts with gravity's quiet pull. And every second you live is shaped by where you are, what you're near, and how you move. And in that truth, you can find not just knowledge, but wonder, because you are not just aging in time. You are shaping it, sculpting it with your mass, stretching it with every breath, every step, every gravitational embrace. And to know this is to realize that you are part of something far stranger and more beautiful than a ticking clock. You are part of a living, bending, warping cosmos, and your time is yours alone. Your brain creates time. It doesn't receive it. You imagine time as something outside of you, like wind brushing past your skin, or waves lapping at your feet. Something that moves while you remain still, watching it flow, but the truth is far more intimate. Time, as you experience it, isn't delivered to you by the universe like a broadcast from some cosmic clock. It's built within your brain piece by piece, moment by moment, not received, but imagined, stitched together from sensations, expectations, and memories, to create the illusion of a steady stream, when in reality, you're living inside a simulation of time your mind generates, just fast enough to keep you sane. It doesn't feel like fiction because your brain is a master of seamless edits, so skilled that you rarely notice the delays between what happens and what you feel, or how your eyes, ears, and skin send signals at different speeds that must be synchronized, adjusted, and filled in for your experience to make sense. Instead of one unified timeline delivered from the outside world, your brain constantly guesses when things happened, how long they lasted, and what came first, using patterns, probabilities, and emotional importance to smooth over gaps. Because nothing in your sensory system is time-stamped. When you hear a sound and see a flash, for instance, your brain may delay the visual signal just enough to match the sound, even if they didn't occur simultaneously. This predictive stitching is called post-diction, and it proves you're always experiencing the world slightly after it's changed. And yet, the result feels immediate. Like a mental film editor, your mind rearranges fragments of reality into a coherent story, backdating your awareness by fractions of a second, and quietly adjusting your sense of when now truly is. But the brain doesn't stop there. It doesn't just organize the present, it invents it. Your sense of time flowing forward, of events unfolding in order, of seconds ticking by evenly, is not how the universe works. It's how your brain makes sense of the universe. In reality, the cosmos doesn't provide a rhythm. It doesn't offer a centralized beat or tell you what now means. Einstein himself shattered that illusion when he showed that simultaneity is relative. Two events can happen at the same time for one observer and at different times for another, depending on motion and gravity. So, if the universe doesn't agree on what time even is, your brain takes matters into its own hands, crafting a version of time that feels consistent, even if it isn't accurate. What you call a second is just a construct, defined internally by pulses of neural activity, by the rhythm of your attention, by the way memory is encoded or emotions intensify a moment. This is why time drags when you're bored, speeds up when you're focused, stretches in a moment of fear, or compresses when you look back on years that passed in a blur. The clock on the wall might measure each second with mechanical certainty, but the time you actually live in, your personal, psychological time, is elastic, dynamic, and deeply subjective. And this subjectivity isn't a bug in the system. It's a feature. Your brain isn't interested in raw accuracy. It's interested in usefulness time. For your mind is not a dimension to be measured, but a tool to organize experience, to plan, to predict, to reflect. When something important happens, something emotionally intense or novel, your brain records more detail, making the moment feel longer in retrospect. When you're on autopilot, repeating familiar routines, it stores less, collapsing hours into a single vague memory. That's why childhood summers feel endless and adult weeks vanish. The more attention your brain devotes to encoding a moment, the longer it seems in memory, meaning that time's length isn't measured in seconds, but in significance. This also explains why waiting feels agonizingly long. Because your attention is hyper, focused on the passage of time itself, making every second heavy, and why moments of flow, where you're fully immersed, make time vanish altogether, as your brain stops monitoring the passage of time and shifts into pure presence. Even more astonishing is how this temporal construction shapes not just your sense of duration, But your identity, your memory, after all, is your only evidence of time's passage. And yet memory is no archive. It's a story, reconstructed each time you recall it, colored by who you are now more than by what happened then. The brain overwrites details, shifts chronology, amplifies some elements and erases others, all to maintain a coherent self-narrative. It's why two people can remember the same event differently. Their brains aren't lying, they're storytelling. And just as memory shapes your sense of the past, imagination shapes your sense of the future. The same brain regions that help you remember also help you simulate what's to come, projecting possibilities based on what you've seen and felt before. But here too, it's not accuracy that matters. It's usefulness. Your brain anticipates. Not to be correct, but to be ready. And in doing so, it creates the future before it arrives. You begin to live in the not yet, planning, fearing, hoping, all before the clock moves. So if time is something your brain creates, rather than something it receives, then what you call reality is already a curated timeline. A version of events your brain believes you can handle. And this raises an unsettling but liberating question. If your mind makes time, can it also change how you live within it? The answer is yes. And the key is attention. Because attention is what gives time its texture. When you pause, reflect, notice, when you step out of autopilot, you begin to reshape the architecture of your mental time. You create more markers, more detail, more meaning. You stretch a minute into something worth remembering. You reclaim your moments from the blur, and when you embrace novelty, break routine, seek wonder, you generate more vivid timestamps, slowing the psychological river of time. In doing so, you're not just enjoying life more, you're bending time's shape from the inside out. You're rewriting the way your brain encodes the world. You don't live in objective time, you never did. You live in constructed time, in brain time, in story time. And that means you have more control than you think. You can choose presence over pace, meaning over momentum. You can anchor yourself in now, not by forcing stillness, but by increasing awareness. Because time doesn't arrive, it's authored. And your brain, whether you realize it or not, is the writer. So the next time you feel like time is running away from you, remember, it's not outside, it's within, and you, more than any ticking clock, are its keeper. Time can be stretched and shrunk by perception. There are days that vanish in a blur, hours that dissolve without a trace, and moments that expand so vividly you remember every breath, every glance, every sound, as if time itself had thickened, slowed, or paused to let you feel more deeply. And what this tells us, perhaps more than any clock ever could, is that time doesn't always flow at a constant pace inside your mind. It bends, compresses, and stretches according to how you perceive it. Shaped not by the laws of physics, but by the rhythms of experience, the emotional weight of a moment, and the patterns of attention that sculpt your awareness. While external time ticks forward with unwavering regularity, internal time, the time you live, feel, and remember, is far more fluid, governed by psychological processes that silently distort its passage without your consent. This is why an hour at a dull meeting can feel longer than a day spent traveling somewhere new, and why waiting in a hospital room can stretch a few minutes into an aching eternity, while a day spent laughing with someone you love feels heartbreakingly brief. The science behind this strange elasticity begins in your brain's temporal system, particularly the interplay between attention, emotion, memory, and prediction. Unlike a mechanical stopwatch, your mind doesn't count seconds. It counts significance. When your senses are engaged, your emotions heightened, or your environment novel, your brain lays down more memory markers, creating the illusion that more time has passed. Conversely, when you're bored, distracted, or stuck in routine, fewer details are recorded, and retrospectively, the period seems shorter. This effect is known as the time paradox. Intense moments feel long as they happen, but short in memory, while dull moments feel short as they occur, but long in hindsight. Neuroscientific studies have demonstrated that your internal experience of time is deeply influenced by the brain's attentional systems. When you are focused, deeply immersed in a task or sensation, whether reading a gripping story, performing music, or solving a complex problem, you often enter a flow state, where time seems to vanish entirely. In these states, the brain suppresses its time tracking mechanisms, and your sense of duration fades. Paradoxically, these timeless periods often leave strong memory imprints afterward, making you feel like much was accomplished in little time. On the other end of the spectrum lies hyper-awareness. When you are acutely self-conscious or emotionally overwhelmed, every second becomes heavy and exaggerated. Trauma victims, for example, often report that time slowed dramatically during an accident or crisis, not because the world changed, but because the brain became hyper-focused, recording every sensory detail with precision in a last-ditch effort to survive. That same mechanism explains why childhood seems to last forever in hindsight. During those early years, everything is new, unfamiliar, unpatterned. Your brain is constantly encoding fresh information, creating thick memory layers that make time feel expansive. As you age and routines dominate, novelty decreases, and so does your memory's density, causing time to appear to accelerate, even though the clocks tick just the same. Your life, then, isn't measured by the number of years you live, but by how intensely and attentively you experience them. But the stretchability of time perception isn't just about memory. It also affects decision-making, judgment, and emotion in the present moment. Think about the psychological weight of anticipation. When you are waiting for something you desire or dread, like a reply to a risky message, or the results of a medical test, time crawls. Every second becomes something you have to endure. This happens because your brain shifts into a state of high expectation and uncertainty, which disrupts its ability to mark time efficiently. In contrast, during moments of certainty, or when you're distracted from outcomes, time resumes its fluid ease. Experimental psychology has shown that even small manipulations, like changing a room's temperature, altering light, or exposing people to specific sounds, can warp how long a minute feels. One famous experiment involved people sitting in a dark room for what they believed was 2-3 minutes, only to discover it had been 30 seconds, or nearly 5 minutes, depending on what they'd been told or what they expected. In these cases, time wasn't experienced, it was interpreted. The perception of duration, it turns out, is more like an emotional opinion than a sensory fact. What's perhaps most fascinating is that your brain doesn't rely on a single internal clock. Instead, different circuits are responsible for short-term and long-term temporal judgments. For example, the cerebellum and basal ganglia help you perceive milliseconds, essential for actions like catching a ball or understanding speech rhythm, while the insular cortex and prefrontal regions process longer time spans, such as hours or days. These systems don't always agree. That is why, during a silent meditation retreat, a single hour might feel eternal, yet the entire week might blur together afterward. Similarly, when you are sick, time often feels slower due to increased interoceptive awareness. Your brain becomes more tuned to your body, making each internal signal feel more pronounced. Even cultural and linguistic factors shape how you interpret time. Some languages structure time spatially, like English, looking forward to the future, while others use vertical metaphors, like Mandarin, up for the future. These differences subtly shift how people think about duration, sequence, and flow, reinforcing the idea that time isn't just perceived differently between individuals, but constructed differently between minds. If all this sounds surreal, consider this. Time doesn't just feel different when you're dreaming. During REM sleep, dreams can seem to stretch over long periods. Even though they may last just seconds, your dreaming brain has no external stimuli or physical clocks. It constructs time entirely from scratch, based on emotional intensity, narrative flow, and symbolic pacing. That's why you can dream an entire adventure in the time it takes your alarm to buzz. Similarly, People who've undergone anesthesia or deep comas often report experiencing no time at all, as if they closed their eyes and reopened them instantly, regardless of how much time passed. These cases reveal that without conscious awareness, time simply ceases to exist in the way we understand it. It doesn't stop. It just stops being measured. So what can we learn from all this? That time, as you live it, is not a constant. It's not rigid. It doesn't flow like a river. It expands and contracts with your mind, your attention, your emotions, your novelty, and your memory. And while you may not control the clock, you do control the experience. If you want to slow life down, you don't need to fight time. You need to fill it. Seek novelty, break routines, pay deeper attention, introduce more markers. Look longer, feel more, because the more meaningful a moment is, the more space it occupies in your inner timeline. You can't change how fast the earth spins, but you can change how full your hours feel. And, in the end, isn't that what really matters? There's no universal now. You might think you are living in the present, breathing the same moment as someone across the world, or even across the room. But the unsettling truth is that the universe doesn't agree with that idea. Because in physics, there is no such thing as a universal now, no single shared moment that all things experience simultaneously, no grand cosmic clock ticking in unison across galaxies. Instead, what you call the present is deeply local, shaped by your motion, your gravity, and your position in space-time. And this realization shatters one of the most intuitive assumptions you've carried your whole life, that now is the same for everyone, everywhere. But in Einstein's theory of relativity, simultaneity, the idea that two events happen at the same time, is not absolute. It's relative. That means two observers moving at different speeds, or located in different gravitational fields, would disagree on the timing of events. What you perceive as now may already be the past, or still the future, for someone else. Time, it turns out, is not a shared river flowing evenly past every shore. It's more like a web of threads, each stretched or curved by velocity and mass, each observer sewing their own patch of temporal fabric. And no single version is more correct than another. This isn't just poetic language, it's experimentally verified. If you take two synchronized atomic clocks and move one to a mountaintop, or fly it on a plane, they will disagree when reunited. Tiny differences, yes, but real, measurable, and permanent. And while those differences are small for us, at cosmic scales, where objects move near the speed of light, or fall into the immense gravity wells of black holes, they become vast, enough to mean that two observers will not only disagree on when something happened, but whether it has happened at all. This means the present is not a fixed slice of time shared by all. It is a viewpoint, a position, a layer of perception that depends on where and how you are. This idea, while scientifically grounded, is deeply unsettling because it challenges the notion of shared reality. If there is no universal now, then every conscious being is marooned on their own island of time, surrounded by a sea of pasts and futures that may not align with anyone else's. And yet, this is the world we live in. Light takes time to travel, so everything you see has already happened. When you look at the moon, you are seeing it as it was 1.3 seconds ago. The Sunday, 8 minutes ago, distant galaxies, millions, even billions of years in the past. The night sky is not a present moment. It is a fossil record of light. Even the person sitting across from you is slightly in your past, their voice and image taking milliseconds to reach your ears and eyes. But relativity goes even further. According to Einstein, the speed of light is constant for all observers, regardless of their motion. To preserve this constancy, space and time must bend, stretch and contract, depending on how fast you are moving or how deep you are in a gravitational field. This warping leads to time dilation. Two observers moving relative to one another will age differently. One's clock ticks slower, the other's faster. This isn't science fiction. It's built into your GPS system, Satellites in orbit experience less gravity and more speed than we do on Earth's surface, so their onboard clocks tick faster. If we didn't correct for this difference, your navigation would be off by kilometers within minutes. The practical technology you use every day depends on this flexible, relative nature of time. But relativity doesn't just stretch time, it fractures the notion of simultaneity. In one famous thought experiment, imagine a train moving at nearly the speed of light. A bolt of lightning strikes both ends of the train simultaneously. At least, that's what an observer on the ground sees. But for someone riding on the train, moving toward one flash and away from the other, the flashes arrive at different times. Both perspectives are valid, both are correct. And yet, they disagree about the order of events. This tells us that simultaneity is not a universal truth. It is observer-dependent. Time is not a singular flow, but a lattice of overlapping timelines, each one relative to a different frame of reference. Now is no longer a cosmic constant. It is a personal experience, shaped by motion and gravity. And so, in the grand scheme of the universe, your present moment is yours alone. For someone moving fast enough, your now might be their past. For someone falling into a black hole, the end of the universe might arrive before your next heartbeat. There is no master clock, no single rhythm guiding all things. There is only perspective, and perspective shapes time. This relativistic view of time has profound implications, not only for physics, but for philosophy, consciousness, and even our emotional lives. If there's no universal now, then concepts like cause and effect, before and after, begin to lose their clean edges. In certain scenarios, like quantum entanglement or rotating black holes, the order of events can even appear to flip. One observer sees A before B, another sees B before A. This does not break physics. It reveals its complexity. Time is not a rigid ruler. It's a flexible coordinate, one that bends around mass and motion. And while your everyday experience smooths these edges into a consistent flow, the deeper reality is much more intricate. What this means is that time is not something you pass through like a river. It's something that emerges from how you move, where you are, and how you observe. Every heartbeat, every memory, every shared glance occurs within a bubble of subjective time. And yet, miraculously, we find enough overlap to live together, to speak, to love, to write stories with beginnings and endings, even if the cosmos itself doesn't recognize such things. And so you begin to understand that the present isn't something you occupy. It's something you construct. It's not an objective slice of the universe, but a mental alignment between sensory input and conscious processing. Even your brain takes time to perceive. Studies show that what you think of as the now is already hundreds of milliseconds delayed. Your mind buffers, processes, interprets, and smooths. You live in a neurological echo, a curated present crafted from slightly outdated information. The real now, if such a thing exists, is always just out of reach, like chasing the horizon. And yet, this doesn't diminish your experience, it enhances it. Because it means that the reality you live in is partly authored by you. Your now is not simply handed to you by physics. It is built from attention, memory, emotion, and meaning, and that makes it precious. In the end, when you stare into the sky and think this is now, you're not wrong, but you are not entirely right either. What you see is a collage of different pasts arriving at your eyes at different speeds. What you feel is a moment stitched from light, thought, and awareness. What you believe to be shared is deeply personal. And perhaps that's the most beautiful paradox of all. That in a universe without a universal now, we still find ways to connect, to meet in the fleeting warmth of mutual perception, and to call it the present. Nostalgia alters time perception. There are moments in life when you catch the scent of something familiar. A certain perfume, the inside of a library, the metallic chill of a school hallway in winter. And without warning, you are transported decades into the past, not as a bystander remembering, but as a participant reliving. And in those instances, the mind plays a strange trick. The past feels not just present, but more present than now, more vivid than this very moment, as if time had bent backward and briefly allowed you to step inside its older shell. This is nostalgia, and while most people think of it as merely a wistful emotion or sentimental longing, the truth is far more intriguing. Nostalgia doesn't just change what you feel about the past, it changes how you perceive the passage of time itself, distorting memory, warping duration, and restructuring the emotional timeline of your life in a way that makes some years feel eternal and others evaporate. And neuroscience now reveals that nostalgia is not a passive reflection, but an active time machine, built by your brain, triggered by cues, and powerful enough to bend your perception of chronology in ways we're only beginning to understand. When you experience nostalgia, your brain is not just recalling events. It's reconstructing them through a filter that prioritizes meaning over detail, emotion over accuracy, and self-identity over historical truth. And in doing so, it shifts your mental tempo. Seconds swell, years compress, childhood moments stretch into timelessness, while entire seasons of adulthood vanish without imprint. This is because your brain measures time through memory density and emotional salience, and nostalgia intensifies both. It creates richer, emotionally heightened memories. Sometimes even memories that didn't happen exactly as recalled. And these reconstructed scenes fill your perception with such vividness that they feel longer, fuller, more real than the neutral passing of time in the present. And that illusion of stretched time in memory has profound consequences for how you interpret your own life's rhythm. Children perceive time differently from adults, because nearly everything they encounter is new. But adults are often trapped in routine, doing the same things in the same ways with the same people. And because the brain stops deeply encoding the familiar, it doesn't store those experiences as richly. So when you look back on a week filled with novelty, it seems longer than a month that passed in repetition. Nostalgia hacks this system by injecting novelty into old memories. It takes a static event from your past and reawakens its emotional intensity, giving it new texture, new weight, even if that event was mundane at the time. This is why a single summer from your youth can feel more emotionally significant than the last 5 years combined. It's not that the past was necessarily better. It's that the emotional and narrative scaffolding your brain built around those moments has grown more detailed over time. And this is why nostalgia alters your perception of time so dramatically. It creates a loop in the timeline of your mind where emotionally charged past moments are replayed more often than dull recent ones, giving the illusion that time is accelerating in the present, while stretching endlessly behind you in memory. From a neuroscientific standpoint, nostalgia lights up the medial prefrontal cortex, associated with self-reflection and identity, and the hippocampus, which encodes memory, while also activating the amygdala, where emotional salience is processed. This triad of activity not only strengthens the recall, but reshapes the experience of that memory as if it were happening now. You don't just think about the past, you inhabit it. Psychologists have found that nostalgic memories tend to cluster around ages 10 to 30, the so-called reminiscence bump, because those are the years of identity formation, emotional peaks, and first experiences. And as you age, your mind returns to those years more frequently, not randomly, but with intent, using them as anchors to stabilize your sense of self in the face of change, loss, or uncertainty. That's why a 60-year-old may feel like their teenage years are emotionally closer than their last decade of adulthood. Nostalgia alters time perception by creating density in selective parts of your memory timeline while leaving other sections hollow. And this uneven emotional mapping gives the illusion that some years were longer or more real than others, even though every year had the same 365 days. The brain doesn't care about calendars. It cares about meaning. It measures time not in minutes, but in memories. This explains why trauma can also distort time in the opposite direction, because when a moment is intensely negative and emotionally charged, it can freeze time, trapping you in a loop of reliving. Nostalgia, though emotionally bittersweet, often has a protective function. It softens the harshness of the present, comforts you with continuity, and gives emotional color to your timeline, making the past feel both fuller and closer. But there's a paradox here, because the more often you revisit the past nostalgically, the more weight it gains in your mind's timeline, and the more recent years seem thin by comparison. You may feel like time is speeding up, not because life is changing faster, but because you are mentally revisiting the same treasured memories again and again, while recording the present. What makes this even more complex is how culture and media amplify this effect. Watching old home videos, re-listening to childhood songs, revisiting the aesthetics of a bygone decade. All these nostalgic triggers don't just spark memories, they manipulate your sense of time by compressing the present and expanding the past, making you feel like an entire era is encapsulated in a single chord progression or color palette. Corporations use this too. Nostalgia marketing plays on collective memory to foster emotional connection to brands or products, tapping into the same neural circuits that give you comfort, warmth, and longing. But nostalgia isn't inherently manipulative. It can also be healing. Research shows that people who experience nostalgia more often tend to have higher resilience, stronger social bonds, and more positive outlooks during distress. It acts like psychological glue, holding together your story during times of uncertainty. And paradoxically, by looking back, you can sometimes move forward more whole. Still, it's important to ask if nostalgia can so profoundly warp time perception. What does that say about the reliability of your emotional experience of your own life? Are you choosing the past, or is the past choosing you? How much of what you call your life is lived in memory, rather than in the moment? And perhaps the deepest insight here is this. Nostalgia teaches us that time isn't just a neutral sequence of seconds. It is elastic, fragile, and deeply subjective. It expands with attention, contracts with distraction, and loops with memory. The moments that meant the most are the ones that refuse to stay in the past. They visit you again and again, subtly reshaping how you measure all time that follows. The hours you laughed with a friend long gone. The streets you walked before life complicated your steps. The words spoken by someone you no longer see. These aren't just echoes, they're scaffolds. And through nostalgia, they grow taller, louder, more vivid, until the present seems like a faint surface over a much deeper pool. So maybe the reason time feels strange isn't because you're losing it, but because your memory keeps whispering that some parts of you are still back there, in the places that made you feel most alive. And in that whisper, the past stretches, the present fades, and time, like memory itself, ceases to move in straight lines. There may be no beginning to time. You've always imagined time like a river, flowing in one direction, from a spring somewhere far behind you to a destination not yet seen. A current that began long before you were born, and will continue long after you're gone. Smooth, linear, irreversible. But what if that entire image is wrong? What if the river has no source, no first drop, no origin point where the current began to flow, and instead curls endlessly back on itself like a looping dream? A line that refuses to be drawn from any beginning. It's a question that disturbs even the calmest corners of your mind. Could time itself be something that never started? Not in a poetic sense, but in the cold, careful language of physics. The very concept of a beginning relies on time. A before, an after, a when. But if time itself is the canvas on which change is painted, how can it also be a brushstroke within the painting? You sit quietly with that thought, and begin to feel the weight of something vast and strange settle over you. Perhaps there wasn't a moment when time began, because moment itself is a product of time. And so asking when time began is like asking what lies north of the North Pole, a question that collapses under its own geometry, not because it lacks meaning, but because it tries to force a concept beyond the boundary of its own definition. Scientists once believed, and many still do, that time began with the Big Bang. A cosmic explosion not just of matter and energy, but of space and time itself. A flashpoint where existence itself lit its first spark. But the deeper we dig into quantum gravity and the edges of space-time, the less certain that beginning becomes equations that once ended at the Big Bang, now keep going. Models from loop quantum cosmology suggest a universe that bounces, not begins. The moment we thought was the start might be just a transition, a midpoint, a rhythmic beat in a much older, even infinite cosmic dance. You can picture it, a universe collapsing inward, then rebounding outward in an endless cycle. No origin, no finish line, just motion and transformation, stitched into the very fabric of being. In such models, the Big Bang is no more the beginning than sunrise is the start of time. Just a phase, a chapter, a ripple on a surface deeper than any calendar can mark. And yet, even if you understand this scientifically, emotionally, it still feels unsettling. You want beginnings. You crave a first cause, a clean slate, a story that opens on page 1. The idea that there may be no page 1, just pages stretching forever in both directions, forces you to rethink what kind of story you're in. And yet, strange as it sounds, physics seems to support this possibility. The closer you peer into the first instant of the universe, the more it slips through your fingers. Quantum fluctuations blur the distinction between what is and what might be. Time itself begins to behave less like a rigid arrow and more like a fog, uncertain, probabilistic, and perhaps even emergent, as if it crystallizes out of deeper laws, only under the right conditions, like frost forming on a window pane. You begin to wonder, if time didn't always exist, what does it mean to exist outside of it? Can something exist without duration? And if the universe did emerge from something timeless, does that mean it came from nothing, or from everything, all at once? These aren't just abstract puzzles. They reach into the core of your identity, your memory, your sense of meaning. Because you were raised to believe in progress, in direction, in birth and death, and before and after. But in a timeless reality, even these anchors begin to. Some theories propose that time is not fundamental at all, but a side effect, a byproduct of change, or even of observation, meaning it's not the universe that ages, but your perception of it. Without a conscious observer to measure events, does time even tick? It's a chilling idea, that the flow of time might not be a cosmic law, but a cognitive illusion, something your brain assembles to make sense of sequence and causality. In this view, the past isn't something that happened, it's something being remembered, and the future isn't waiting for you. It's something being imagined. Only the present is real, and even that might be a construction, a blink of awareness stitched into a blur. And so you begin to question the very grammar of your thoughts. What does it mean to say, was, will be, or even is? When the entire tense system might be a mental fiction built to survive in a world of entropy and decay. And yet, despite this deep uncertainty, there is something oddly calming in the idea that time may have no beginning. Because if there was never a start, there may never be a true end. Just transformation, evolution, renewal. In the grandest sense, this makes existence feel less like a fragile spark, and more like a perpetual unfolding. A wave without a shore, a heartbeat without a first pulse. You are not a byproduct of some singular, miraculous event. You are part of something eternal, cyclical, recursive, a pattern dancing across the canvas of being. And when you look up at the night sky and try to imagine what came before everything, perhaps the answer isn't a moment, but a mirror. Perhaps time curves back on itself like a question whose answer is its own asking. You are not at the beginning. You are not at the end. You are inside the pattern, mid-spiral, a brief awareness in an endless rhythm. And maybe that's what it means to exist. Not to chase a first cause, but to dance in the wake of something that never needed one. Because in a universe where time has no beginning, your existence isn't late. It's always arriving. You never live in the actual moment. You think you're here now, reading these words in the present. But by the time you process each sentence, the moment that gave birth to them has already slipped into memory, like sunlight that warmed your face a second ago, but no longer touches your skin. And this quiet realization, this strange lag between reality and awareness, isn't poetic metaphor, but a measurable fact of how your brain works, how your senses lag behind the world they're trying to understand, and how what you think of as now is always a story told in past tense. Light bounces off an object, enters your eyes, and is converted into neural signals that travel along your optic nerve to the brain's visual cortex, where it's interpreted, shaped, filtered, and finally presented to your conscious awareness. A process that takes roughly 80 milliseconds, and although that may sound infinitesimal, it means you're perpetually reacting to a world that no longer exists in exactly the form your mind presents, because by the time your brain assembles the present, the universe has already moved on, reshaped itself, changed its pattern slightly, silently leaving you behind to experience not what is, but what just was. And the implications of this are both haunting and profound, because it means you've never truly lived in the present, only in the reconstruction of it. And every smile you see, every sound you hear, every hand you hold, is already a ghost by the time you experience it, a flickering illusion stitched together by your brain to give you the comfort of continuity. A constructed, now that helps you make sense of a world that never waits, never stops, never freezes to let you catch up. And once you accept this, you begin to understand that your perception is not a window but a rendering, not a live feed but a playback, where sensation and cognition lag just enough that you are always a witness, never a participant in reality's cutting edge. And this delay, though imperceptible in daily life, scales with distance and complexity, with the speed of light and the slowness of thought, and becomes more than a curiosity when you consider that even your sense of self, shaped by unconscious processes that decide before you do, meaning your consciousness is less a driver and more a commentator, narrating a life already underway. And in this sense, your entire experience is not only belated, but curated, sculpted by networks of neurons that filter, predict, and fill in gaps in the data they receive, generating a version of the world that feels immediate, coherent, and stable. But that stability is a lie of necessity, a perceptual convenience, because your brain isn't interested in showing you the raw truth of what's out there. It's interested in showing you a version of reality that's useful, survivable, emotionally manageable. And this includes editing time itself, smoothing over the lags, trimming the delays, and handing you a seamless present that is, in truth, always already gone. Consider the implications of this for your sense of identity. If you are always perceiving the past, then your reactions, your decisions, even your thoughts about who you are formed in response to a world that no longer exists. Meaning your sense of self is a delayed echo of a delayed perception, a story you tell yourself about a person you used to be, built on sensory and emotional data that's constantly being reconstructed, reinterpreted, and revised by the very brain that created the illusion of immediacy to begin with. And when you begin to see yourself as a lagging reflection rather than a present, tense being, your grip on certainty loosens, your assumptions soften, and you start to realize that the present isn't something you live in. It's something your mind recreates for you after the fact. A cinematic projection running just behind reality's unfolding frame. And what's more, this delay isn't just perceptual, it's emotional. When you feel joy, sadness, anger, or awe, those feelings are not reactions to the immediate world, but to your internal simulation of it. And this simulation is always behind the times, always lagging behind the latest change, meaning that even your emotions are out of sync with the world they appear to respond to, like music playing half a beat after the dancers have moved. And this disconnect explains so much about human behavior, about the tendency to regret, to second, guess, to misunderstand each other, to feel off or behind, or as if life is slipping through your fingers faster than you can grasp it. Because it is, and always has been. This isn't a flaw in your design, it's a feature of consciousness itself, because to be aware at all requires time, to process, to integrate, to understand, and your brain, miraculous though it is, cannot show you the world in real time. So instead, it shows you a plausible recent past, one that feels current but never quite is. And this temporal sleight of hand is what keeps you sane, allows you to function, to speak, to read, to dance, and drive and dream. But it also means that your life is never lived where you think it is, never in the now you think you occupy. And this has philosophical consequences as deep as any religious doctrine or existential theory, because it suggests that the search for presence, for mindfulness, for absolute immediacy is always doomed to fail. Not because you're distracted or flawed or insufficient, but because presence itself is a neurological illusion, a moment that cannot be entered because by the time you reach for it, it has already become a memory. And so, when you meditate or pause or breathe deeply to return to the now, what you're really doing is learning to accept the impossibility of true presence, to embrace the echo as if it were the source, to find peace not in catching the moment, but in riding the delay, dancing gracefully on the edge of what just passed. And in doing so, you come closer to what presence really means. Not immediate awareness, but intentional reflection, not being in the moment, but being aware of the moment's passing, the moment's departure, the moment's ghost. And perhaps this is the secret, not just of awareness, but of wisdom, to know that you live behind the veil, to recognize that your reactions trail the world, that your memories reshape the past, and your expectations rewrite the future, and that what you call now is a fiction carefully maintained by your biology to let you feel grounded in a world that is always slipping, always shifting, always gone before you arrive. And once you see this, once you accept that you never live in the actual moment, you begin to let go of the pressure to capture it, to hold it, to master it, and instead you allow the flow, you allow the mystery, you allow yourself to be the receiver, the interpreter, the late arrival to a scene that was never meant to be, frozen. And in that letting go, you gain something else: compassion, for yourself and for others, because you realize that we're all lagging behind, all stumbling through a world slightly misaligned with our awareness, all doing our best to understand a reality that's already one step ahead. And this shared delay becomes not a limitation, but a bridge, a gentle reminder that life isn't lived in the now, but in the effort to meet it. So the next time you find yourself chasing the present, trying to grasp the ungraspable, remember, you're not late, you're human, you're not disconnected. You're just wired to interpret, not to coincide. And maybe, just maybe, the beauty of life lies not in being perfectly synchronized with reality, but in watching it go by, and knowing that even if you're always a few milliseconds behind, you're still here, still feeling, still translating the light and sound of a world that never waits, and yet somehow always welcomes you, even if only as a memory. Your brain predicts events before they happen. You might believe that you react to the world in real time, that you see something, hear something, feel something, and then respond. But your brain, quietly and constantly, is playing a very different game. It isn't simply reacting to reality as it arrives, it's predicting it before it happens, constructing a model of the world not based on what is occurring, but what it expects to occur, and only correcting that model when something surprises it, meaning that every moment you experience is not a raw reflection of the external world, but a prediction, a best guess, a probabilistic forecast built from memory, habit, and context. And this prediction arrives slightly before the sensory data it corresponds to, meaning that, in a strange but measurable way, your brain is anticipating your life, shaping your experience of reality just before the reality actually reaches you. And though this might sound like science fiction or poetic exaggeration, it's grounded in neuroscience, in decades of studies that show your perception is not passive but proactive, a continuous loop of hypothesis and error correction, a process where your brain's expectations guide what you experience, down to the timing of the signals that shape your visual field, your tactile sensations, your understanding of sound, and even your emotional reactions. Because to survive in a chaotic world with limited processing speed, your brain evolved not to wait, but to predict, and that simple change in approach alters everything. Consider, for instance, how you see. When light enters your eyes, it takes time, about 100 to 200 milliseconds, for that visual information to be processed and turned into something conscious. And in that gap, your brain fills in the scene using its best estimate of what should be there, based on what it's seen before, on what it expects, on what statistically makes sense. And you rarely notice, because most of the time, its guess is accurate or close enough. But every now and then you do notice a misstep, a visual illusion, a sudden jump when something unexpected happens. And that moment of surprise isn't because your brain finally saw something. It's because its prediction was wrong, and it had to recalibrate in real time, revealing the mechanism that usually hides behind the smoothness of your perception. And once you realize this, once you understand that everything you see, hear, and feel is filtered through this prediction engine, you begin to question the very notion of experience. What does it mean to see something if your brain is already deciding what it is before the light from it reaches you? This system, called predictive coding, is now understood to be a foundational principle of the brain's operation, not just for vision, but for nearly every aspect of consciousness, from the way you interpret language, to how you feel pain, to how you regulate your body's internal states. And in this model, your brain is constantly generating expectations, comparing them with incoming sensory input, and updating them based on the mismatch, a cycle of prediction and error correction that creates the seamless illusion of awareness. And what's even more astonishing is that your timing, your sense of when things happen, is also governed by this predictive machinery. So when you hear a sound like someone clapping their hands, or when you touch an object, your brain predicts the sensory consequences of those actions milliseconds before they occur, and aligns your experience to match the expected timing, smoothing over delays in processing so that everything feels instantaneous, coordinated, unified. And yet none of it actually is, because the world moves faster than your consciousness can process. So your brain cheats, skips ahead, generates a preview of events before they finish arriving, giving you a sense of presence that is, by design, predictive rather than reactive. Nowhere is this more evident than in sports, where elite athletes seem to respond to stimuli faster than reflexes allow. A tennis player returns a 130 ace serve not by reacting to the ball's current position, but by predicting its trajectory the moment it leaves the opponent's hand, using subtle cues and practiced mental models to anticipate where it will go before it gets there. And this same principle applies to how you catch a falling glass, finish someone's sentence, flinch at a sudden sound, or even read a paragraph like this one. Your mind is always running ahead, preparing for the next frame, the next syllable, the next moment, but because it can't afford not to run ahead. And in this way, your life is less about responding to reality and more about continuously betting on what's likely to happen next, with each correct prediction reinforcing your sense of control, and each mistake triggering confusion, correction, and learning. But this also means that your experience of the world is shaped not only by what's out there, but by what you expect to be out there, which introduces a layer of fragility into perception. Because if your expectations are strong enough, they can override the evidence of your senses, causing you to see things that aren't there, or fail to notice things that are. Why optical illusions are convincing, why eyewitness testimony is unreliable, and why sometimes you can look right at something and not see it. Your brain filters reality through its model. And when the model is wrong, you're blind to the truth. Not because your eyes failed, but because your predictions were too confident. And this fragility scales in social interactions, in political beliefs, in relationships. You often experience not people or events as they are, but as your brain expects them to be, constructing interpretations before full information arrives, shaping emotions and decisions based on what you think is going to happen. And sometimes, that prediction becomes self-fulfilling. Take a moment to reflect on how this applies to emotions. When you anticipate pain, your brain prepares your body in advance, tightening muscles, increasing heart rate, amplifying your sensitivity. And this anticipatory state can create the pain before the injury even arrives. The same goes for fear, sadness, even joy. When you predict an outcome, your body begins to feel it, setting off the appropriate internal responses before the event unfolds. So your emotional world is often a reflection of expectation more than reality. And that means your moods, your hopes, your anxieties may not be reactions at all, but forecasts, experiences you've constructed in advance, and then lived as though they were real. And this realization isn't just insightful, it's empowering. Because it means that changing your predictions can change your reality not magically, but neurologically, by reshaping the model your brain uses to interpret the world. And this opens a door to something even more profound, that consciousness itself, the feeling of being alive in a world of continuity, is a product of prediction, not perception, that your sense of identity, of agency, of narrative flow, is the sum of what your brain expects your life to be. And your awareness is simply the spotlight that follows that script, updating when needed, but mostly flowing ahead, smoothing the path of experience before your senses arrive. And in this light, even free will becomes blurry, because your decisions are influenced by what your brain predicts you will want to do, what it thinks makes the most sense given your prior behavior, your context, your goals, and often, you follow that prediction without realizing it was made before you chose, like stepping into a role written for you by your own neural machinery. But rather than seeing this as a threat to autonomy, you can see it as an invitation to become a more conscious participant in your own predictions, to examine the stories your brain is telling in advance, to question not just what you perceive, but what you expect to perceive, to shape a version of yourself that is not merely reactive but reflective, not just riding the wave of predictions, but learning to nudge their direction, to train your brain to expect possibility, openness, kindness, and nuance, and to see how those expectations then influence what becomes real. Because if you live in a forecasted reality, then forecasting wisely is the path to wisdom. So the next time you notice a reaction before you realize its cause, a flinch before the sound, a smile before the joke, a fear before the danger, pause and remember, your brain is not waiting for the world to tell it what's happening. It's already halfway there, writing the script, painting the frame, living slightly ahead of the moment. And while you may never escape this prediction loop, you can learn to listen to it, to shape it, to question it, and in doing so, begin to live more gently inside a brain that's always one step ahead, trying its best to prepare you for a future that has not yet arrived. The present is a moving target. You often think of the present as a fixed point, a sharp line dividing what has already happened from what is yet to come, a reliable now, where you live your life moment by moment anchored in the real unfolding world. But in truth, that present is always slipping, always shifting, always one step ahead of your awareness. And the more closely you try to grasp it, the more it vanishes like a mirage, revealing itself not as a destination you occupy, but as a moving target. Your mind is constantly chasing and reconstructing. What you experience as now isn't a real-time feed from the universe, but a carefully calculated composite, a mental reconstruction delayed by milliseconds, built from scattered inputs, shaped by memory, adjusted by prediction, and always lagging behind the reality it tries to represent. Even the simplest action, catching a ball, hearing your name, touching a surface, requires your brain to integrate signals that arrive at different speeds and from different senses, blending them into a single illusion of simultaneity. This seamless perception is a feat of constant editing, a balance between what just happened and what your brain expects to happen. And that means the present, as you know it, is always part past, part guess, never pure, never immediate. And yet, it feels immediate because your brain backdates your experience, adjusting the timeline to keep your inner world synchronized with the outer one. Not for accuracy, but for coherence. It's a brilliant illusion, so flawless that you rarely suspect the delay, and so convincing that you forget you are living inside a time. Delayed simulation, always a fraction of a second behind the universe. You think you're experiencing in real time. This becomes even more complex when you realize that there is no universal, now in the first place, not in physics, and not in neuroscience. Einstein showed us that time is relative, not absolute. What counts as now, for you might not be now, for someone moving quickly or standing in a stronger gravitational field. Two events that seem simultaneous to you might not be simultaneous to an astronaut orbiting Earth or someone standing near a black hole. So the present isn't just unstable in your own mind, it's different for everyone, depending on speed, position, and context. Physics gives us no privileged present. The laws of nature are time, symmetric, indifferent to now. And yet your mind insists on carving the stream of experience into a flowing line with a past, a present, and a future. Because evolution wired your brain to do so. For survival, you need to know what just happened, what's happening now, and what will happen next, even if those categories are psychological fabrications. Your brain invents a present, not because it's real, but because it's useful. It's the mental stage on which you perform your life, constantly updated, but never real, time always slightly blurred at the edges. Neuroscience reveals just how fabricated this present really is. In experiments, researchers have shown that your brain can delay conscious awareness to make sense of ambiguous stimuli. For example, in the color phenomenon, when two lights flash in quick succession, one red and one green, you don't just see two flashes. You see a single light moving and changing color in between, even though that change never occurred. Your brain constructs a fluid motion after both flashes have happened, then retroactively inserts that story into your awareness as if it happened in the moment. This shows that your perception is not just delayed, it's edited. Similarly, when a sudden event occurs, like a loud noise or a visual surprise, your brain may slow down internal time to give you more information, stretching that moment so it feels longer, even though the clock says otherwise. These temporal illusions are not errors. They're strategies. They help your brain prioritize threats, react with precision, and build a reality that feels smooth and logical. But in doing so, they distort your sense of now, making it clear that what you call the present is neither stable nor singular. It's malleable, contextual, and deeply dependent on what your brain is trying to accomplish. And the more you examine your moment to moment awareness, the more slippery the present becomes. You might think you are aware of the now as it unfolds, but your consciousness actually operates in brief windows, sampling reality in chunks, like frames in a film. Then filling in the gaps to maintain the illusion of continuity. Your brain groups these moments into temporal units, roughly 2-3 seconds long, within which it merges inputs and makes judgments outside those windows. Events can feel disconnected or misaligned, which is why music feels strange when slightly out of rhythm, or why a spoken word can seem odd when slightly delayed. Your brain is constantly working to line up its internal timeline, and when that alignment falters, the illusion of the present begins to crack. In trauma or altered states, under the influence of drugs, during meditation, or in the face of danger, this sense of flowing time can dissolve completely. People report feeling outside of time, floating in an eternal now, or watching events unfold in slow motion. These are not mere poetic descriptions. They're windows into how fluid and constructed your present really is. And this construction affects everything: your decision-making, your sense of self, your emotional responses. Because you don't react to the present as it is, you react to the version your brain has assembled. If your mind predicts a danger that doesn't come, or misses a signal that did, your reaction may feel delayed, or inappropriate, or confusing. Your memories, too, reshape your present. When you remember something vividly, you bring it into your working consciousness, and for a brief moment, it feels like now. This is why nostalgia can overwhelm you with emotions that feel real in the moment, or why traumatic memories can intrude as if they're happening again. In both cases, the past overrides the present. Similarly, your expectations for the future can warp the now, making it feel longer, heavier, or more urgent, depending on what you anticipate. If you are waiting for bad news, time drags. If you are lost in excitement, it flies. Your present is constantly being pulled forward and backward by psychological forces, never staying still, never purely present. So if the present is not a fixed point, but a moving target, if your experience of now is a construction assembled in hindsight, influenced by memory, attention, prediction, and context, then perhaps the question isn't where you are in time, but how you are creating it. Because once you understand that your present is a process, not a place, you begin to see how much influence you have over it. You can shape your now by shifting your focus, by disrupting your routines, by choosing what you notice and how deeply you engage. You can slow time down by immersing yourself in the moment, by attending to detail. You can reclaim it from the autopilot of habit and bring it back into vivid clarity. You can't stop the arrow of time, but you can step out of the blur and feel its texture again. And that's the paradox. The present is always moving, but you can still meet it, just not by chasing it. You meet it by pausing, by noticing, by being. And maybe that's the quiet lesson hidden beneath all this science. That presence isn't something given to you by time, but something you give to time. The more aware you become of how your mind constructs now, the more you realize you have a say in what your present feels like. It may be fleeting, shifting, elusive, but it's also yours to shape. You live not in a fixed timeline, but in a fluid one. And in every moment, your brain is not just recording the present. It's creating it, sculpting it from expectation and memory and meaning. The present is a moving target, yes, but with attention and awareness, you can still aim toward it. You can still feel it land. You can still live inside a moment that, while never still, is still real. Dreams can feel like hours in seconds. It's one of the strangest things your mind can do. Compress a lifetime into seconds. Stretch a moment into what feels like hours, or unfold an entire story while your body lies still in the dark. Because dreaming doesn't just defy logic, it defies time itself, bending it, sculpting it, and sometimes dissolving it altogether, leaving you to wake with the eerie sense that something immense just happened. Though only a minute or two may have passed in the real world, you may find yourself running through forests, arguing with old friends, falling in love, losing someone, climbing impossible staircases, or flying over oceans in sequences that feel vivid, detailed, and expansive. Yet, when your eyes open and your alarm clock glows, you realize only seconds have elapsed. What makes this possible is that dreams operate not on external reality, but on an internal clock. One built not from seconds, but from symbols, not from hours, but from emotions. And that clock doesn't measure time like a stopwatch, but like a river of meaning, flowing as fast or as slow as your mind needs it to. In waking life, your sense of time is tied to sensory input, physical movement, and external cues, light, sound, routine. But in dreams, those anchors vanish. Without them, your brain becomes both storyteller and timekeeper, constructing entire timelines from fragments of memory, fear, desire, and imagination, and doing so without constraint. And the strange part? Your brain doesn't need a real hour to simulate the feeling of one. It only needs to fire the right patterns in the right sequence. And suddenly you've lived through an entire episode of experience, while only a few minutes tick by in reality. Scientifically, this ability comes from how your brain processes and encodes experience in altered states of consciousness. During REM sleep, the phase when most vivid dreams occur, your brain is highly active, even more so in some regions than during wakefulness. Yet it is cut off from the outside world. Your muscles are paralyzed, your senses dampened, your body resting. Internally, however, your brain simulates entire environments, characters, conflicts, and resolutions, often without your control or consent. Time in dreams is felt, not measured, and since the dream state bypasses the usual temporal cues, sunlight, heart rate, gravity, motion, your brain is free to pace the narrative however it wants. It can make a 5-second fall from a building feel like a prolonged descent, complete with emotional processing, sensory hallucinations, and even imagined thoughts about the fall itself. In studies where participants are woken from REM sleep and asked to estimate how long their dreams lasted, their responses rarely match actual elapsed time. Some report dreams lasting an hour that took place in under 2 minutes. Others recall only a flash of imagery, though 20 minutes had passed. This mismatch reveals that time perception in dreams is more of an emotional and narrative rhythm than a chronological one, more like music than math. Part of this illusion comes from the brain's remarkable ability to create continuity from disjointed fragments. Dreams often begin abruptly, with no introduction or transition. Yet your mind accepts the scene as normal. You might be in your childhood bedroom one moment, then walking across a frozen lake, speaking a language you don't know. And yet within the dream, it all feels internally consistent, as though time had passed naturally to bring you from one moment to the next. Your brain fills in the blanks, invents the transitions, and supplies the emotional glue that holds the dream together. This narrative cohesion creates the illusion of temporal duration, even when none exists. What's more, your dreaming mind doesn't just simulate events, it simulates memory of those events. It implants false familiarity, makes you believe you've been here before, that this story has context and history, even if it was conjured seconds ago. That false familiarity expands the dream's apparent length. Just like rich backstory makes a short film feel like a full movie, and because your sense of time is so deeply tied to memory and emotional salience, dreams rich in conflict, novelty, or tension feel far longer than dreams that drift without focus. Time in dreams is dense when it matters, thin when it doesn't. From a neuroscientific perspective, the phenomenon is tied to the way different parts of the brain go offline or change connectivity during dreaming. The prefrontal cortex, the seat of logic and linear sequencing, becomes less active in REM sleep, while the amygdala and limbic system, the centers of emotion, light up. The result is that dreams unfold in emotional time, not chronological time. A single look, a sudden fear, or a sense of loss can dominate a dream and make it feel vast, even if it was brief. This emotional intensity affects your perception of time's flow. The same happens in waking life. Moments of shock, awe, or terror feel longer, not because they are longer, but because your brain encodes them more deeply. In dreams, the effect is amplified, because the ordinary filters of rationality are absent. The brain becomes a film editor without a deadline, rearranging scenes, distorting pacing, and adding slow motion or montage at will. Some dreams loop, some skip forward. Others end abruptly with a sudden fall, a sound, or a sensation of awakening, each bending your sense of time in a different direction. And yet, despite this freedom, dreams still follow internal logic. They still feel paced. You still recognize beginning, middle, and end, just as you do in stories, even when time is non-linear. This suggests that your brain is not just simulating experiences in dreams, but simulating the structure of time. You construct mental timelines in your sleep, complete with causality and consequence, even if they don't match physical time. That means the experience of time itself is something your brain builds, not something it passively receives. And this dream-based flexibility offers clues into how we might better understand waking time perception as well. Just as dreams compress hours into seconds, waking states like flow, meditation, or trauma can stretch or shrink time. The mechanism isn't dream exclusive, it's consciousness wide. But why does any of this matter? Because it reminds you that your life isn't measured only by what happens, but by how you experience it. And dreams prove that the human mind is capable of generating entire lifetimes of emotion, reflection, fear, joy, or resolution even in the absence of real-world input. That's both inspiring and humbling. It means your internal world has the power to generate meaning and memory on its own terms. It means a few seconds, properly filled, can contain vast significance. And it means that time, for you, is not just what the clocks say, it's what your consciousness creates. Whether you are asleep or awake, lost in a dream or focused on a task, the minutes of your life are sculpted not by the tick of the second hand, but by the weight of what they carry. In the end, dreams are more than stories. They're proof that time, too, can be imagined, and maybe that's why we dream at all. To remind ourselves that reality, even temporal reality, is not something we simply live in, but something we help build. Time speeds up as you age. There's a strange, silent betrayal that sneaks up on you not with a bang, but with a slow erosion of days. The feeling that time is slipping faster and faster as you grow older, that years are collapsing into memories before you even have a chance to fully live them, that the same week that used to feel endless in childhood now vanishes in the blink of a routine. And while this sensation may seem like a poetic illusion or a wistful complaint of adulthood, it is deeply rooted in the psychology and neurobiology of how your brain processes time itself. A phenomenon so consistently reported across age groups and cultures that it has a name: time compression, or more personally, the temporal acceleration of age. But what's truly astonishing is that this perception isn't caused by external changes in the world. It's not the clocks or calendars speeding up. It's your internal tempo, your attention, your memory encoding, and your sense of novelty that undergo transformation. You see, time is not felt linearly. It is constructed from mental snapshots, and the fewer snapshots your brain takes, the shorter the period feels in retrospect. When you're young, everything is new. Your brain is bombarded with novel stimuli, unfamiliar experiences, first-time feelings. And in those moments, it records more detail, more vivid imprints, because novelty stimulates more neural encoding. These densely packed memories give the illusion that time was fuller, slower, stretched. But as you age and your days become filled with repetition, commutes, emails, habits, routines, your brain stops encoding as deeply. It skips the familiar, assumes the known, and thus compresses the memory. A week with 10 vivid experiences feels longer than a month with only one. It's not the passing of time that changes. It's the texture of what gets recorded. That's why the summer you learned to swim or traveled abroad at 17 felt eternal, while your last 5 Novembers seem indistinguishable. And there's another layer beneath this: the psychological ratio of time to lived life. When you are 5, a year is 20% of your entire existence, an ocean of time. When you're 50, a year is a mere 2%, a droplet. This proportion warps your internal scale. The same hour that once felt like a journey now feels like a pause. The same weekend that once opened like a novel now closes like a page torn away. This relative shrinking of time's value distorts your expectations and your emotional connection to it. The passage of time becomes background noise, no longer commanding attention. And yet, time is attention. The more you focus, the slower it feels. The more you drift, the faster it disappears. This is why mindfulness, or being fully present, can restore a childlike sense of expansion, while being distracted accelerates the blur. Neuroscience backs this up. Your perception of time is shaped not by a central clock, but by multiple brain systems, particularly in the insular cortex and basal ganglia, that interact with dopamine and memory networks. When attention is heightened, time dilates. When emotion is strong, time lingers. But when predictability takes over, when novelty fades, when you coast through autopilot days, your brain stops taking snapshots. And in the absence of detail, your mind says, "That didn't last long." And so the months fly, the years collapse. You find yourself saying things like, "Wasn't that just last year?" Only to discover it happened 5 years ago. Even more intriguing is how aging affects your anticipation of time. Children live in the moment because their mental timeline hasn't fully developed. They exist in a string of nows with limited long-term planning. Adults, however, forecast constantly. You think about deadlines, retirement, tomorrow's schedule, but the more you live in the future, the less you experience the present. And this psychological skipping ahead speeds up your subjective time even more. Studies have shown that people who worry about the future or dwell in abstract planning feel time accelerating faster than those who immerse themselves in the immediate. Time spent in worry is time unlived. It rushes by without residue. And so we return to the paradox. The more you try to manage time, organize it, track it, optimize it, the more it slips through your fingers. You start saying yes to obligations and no to wonder. You begin to equate productivity with value, and in doing so, you become a participant in your own temporal acceleration. You feed it. But this phenomenon isn't irreversible. The human brain retains the ability to slow time through conscious design. The key lies in novelty, emotion, and intentional awareness. Take a new route home. Learn a language, dance for no reason. These actions force your brain to notice. They carve deeper grooves into memory. They stretch perception. The richness of your experience expands the felt length of time. You don't need to quit your job or travel the world to reclaim time. You need to break the spell of sameness. When you return to wonder, you return to presence, and presence is time's anchor. The irony is that children are masters of this without trying. A puddle is a mystery. A shadow is a game. They dwell so fully in moments that time has no choice but to slow down. In this way, time is not your enemy, it's your mirror. It reflects how fully you live, how sharply you observe, how often you pause to ask, am I really here? And perhaps this is the hidden wisdom of growing older. Not that time must race forward, but that you become more aware of its fragility. You begin to understand that moments are not renewable, that attention is finite, and that meaning is what stretches minutes into memories. The days will still pass, but how they pass is up to you. Whether they become a blur or a tapestry depends on how deeply you weave your awareness into them. And in that sense, the speed of time is not just perception, it's participation. It's the art of choosing to show up, of turning routine into ritual, of feeling the breeze not as weather, but as presence. The more you participate, the more time reveals itself, not as a thief, but as a quiet companion, always waiting for you to notice.